Hello, we'll see today two problems by Yves Cheylan, who died recently in the 1st on May of this year, and two nice problems that are about pins. That was a theme that Yves worked quite often. The first problem is light, and is rather easy to solve, so people who want to solve are invited to do so immediately, and we begin to show the position. So the jail of the black king is closed. c6 is controlled by the rook c5, and also c7 by the rook c5. The two squares d7 and e6 are controlled by the knight f8. The e7 square is controlled by the knight on g8, and the bishop on h8 controls e5. d5 is controlled by the bishop f3, by the rook c5, and by the queen d1. So everything is controlled, and of course the c5 square is controlled by the pawn b4. You have also two pins. The black queen is pinned, so she can't play out of the d column, and also the rook on c5 is pinned by the queen. So all in all, there is not much play for white, so we'll see. There is one try and the solution. Technically, I'll show immediately something that is not bound to the content of the problem. Bishop takes queen, threatening rook mate on c6 because of the unpinning and because of the control of the square. If knight takes, you have queen takes, but knight, then black knight can go to d3, and then it binds the rook c5 to the control of the d5 square, so that she can't, the rook, it can't give mate anymore. So we'll see the first intended try by the author. It is king b6. King b6 unpins the rook c5. Now the rook is no more pinned. Controls c6, and then you have a threat now of rook c6 gives mate, and black has no much to do against this, but you have one interesting move is queen goes to d4, controls now the mate by pinning again the rook c5, but then the queen opens the line of the rook c5 to e5, and then you have bishop e5 mates because the queen is still pinned, and then you have this mate. So the refutation of this try is bishop g1, that pins the rook without having any negative effect for black. So the solution, you can still try to find it by yourself. I will immediately give it. Queen d1 to d4. Queen d1 to d4 controls, gives a new control on e5 and threatens bishop e5, and then you have the move that we saw immediately, that is queen takes queen, queen to d4. That is not anymore pinned because the white queen went to d4, and the queen on d4 now controls e5. But now you have rook c6, because when the queen left d5, she opened the line of the bishop f3, and then you are now able to mate by rook c6. You can see also that if the knight goes anywhere, you have queen takes queen mate, and that's it. So the nice content of the problem here is that between the try king b6 and the solution queen d4, you have exchanged mates between the threat and the solution and the mate after queen d4. We'll see once again quickly what happens. You have king b6, let's say, threatening rook c6. The move queen d4 is a defense because it pins the rook, and then you have the mate by bishop e5. And in the solution you have queen d4 threatening now the mate of the bishop, and the same black move queen d4 provokes rook c6. So it's a nice and light way to show this difficult theme. And we go to the next problem. The next problem is a bit more heavy in pieces, and you have immediately some lines and some checks to the white king that you can see. You have also a pin here. The knight d2 is pinned by the queen. The queen can give checks on a8, on g8, on d5, on d2, and we'll have to see what white can answer to these moves. You have also another move that is quite strong. Rook takes e7, that gives a flight on d7. Let's have a look at the way the jail of the king is made. The rook c5 controls c6 and d5, and also c7 and e5, but mainly these two squares forbid the rook to give mate, because if the rook leaves or on the fifth rank or on the c column, it will give a flight to the black king. You have the c7 square that is controlled by the queen, by the pawn, and by the rook. You have the d7 square that is blocked by the rook, by the black rook, and not controlled by any white piece. The e7 square is controlled only by the knight on g8, and e6 is controlled by the f5 pawn. So you have a complete control and no flight on the set play by the king. I don't give you the detail, but if you look carefully, you'll find that all the checks to the white king are answered by a mate to the black king. So we'll see this just after the key. You can pause, you can stop the video now and search for the solution, and I give immediately the key. The key is pawn. No, sorry. I give you first some brutal tries to understand what happens on them. Let's try bishop takes queen. That is threatening mates by the knight, and that controls with the rook. Also, it will control the square d7, so that you will not be able to give a flight. It will be useless. So the answer of this is rook takes, that pins once more the knight, and that takes the bishop, so that the rook c5 is still needed to control c6 and d5. Another brutal try is rook king b1, that unpins the knight, but it will be answered by rook takes rook check. And another try, king b3. Black will play queen f3 in order not to open the line of the bishop and to give check, and then you are not able to give mate. The knight cannot give mate by taking the queen because of the bishop e5 that controls d4. So the solution is pawn takes pawn, pawn b6 takes c7, and threatening c7 c8, or make a knight with double check, so that nor the knight nor the rook will be able to cover the check of the queen on c7. So the threat is only c7 c8 equal knight. So let's have a look at the defenses by the black queen first. The black queen can only give checks in order to forbid the threat, and let's have a look. Queen a8 opens the line of the bishop, also on c6, also on d5, so that the rook now is completely free to move, and then the rook will go to a5 to close the line of the check, and it is a mate. If the queen goes to d5, the d5 square is controlled, but the rook cannot go to c4 because, let's try, it is not useful because now the queen is not pinned and can go to c5, and so that the rook c4 is not a mate. But now you have knight c4 that is a mate, because the queen is pinned when the knight goes. The rook can take the king. Another move is queen takes g8, and now knight c4 is no more a mate because the king can go to e7. When the knight has been taken by the knight g8 has been taken, there is now a flight on e4, on e7. So the mate is rook c4 and not rook d5, because it would intercept the bishop on h1 and the king would be able to go to c6. Last check by the black is queen d2 check, and here you opened the line of the bishop, and then white can answer rook c2 because the queen is pinned once again by the rook d1, and then this is a mate. If you have knight takes c7, e7 e8 knight is made using the pinning of the c7 knight by white. If rook takes c7, you have e7 d8 equal queen or rook, that is using also the pinning, the self-pinning by the black rook. You have another defense is rook takes e7, that gives a flight, and now you have the c7 pawn that goes to d8 and makes a queen or a rook, and it is made by double check. So that's all. You have many lines, many long lines, some pin mates, some pinning of white pieces, and all in all it's a very nice problem. Thank you and bye.